So I would like to introduce James Head, the CEO of the East Bay Community Foundation. And James has been a longtime resident of Oakland. He's the former president of the National Economic Development and Law Center, former vice president of programs at the San Francisco Foundation. James also serves as a commissioner for the Oakland Port, the nation's 5th busiest port, and is a former NFG board member. So welcome, James.
So let me first again welcome you to Oakland. I now call it my hometown. I've been here since 1986, and I don't know what it takes to become a born-bred Oaklander, but I consider myself to be that. Let me also say that as you think about Oakland, and it has many names, Oaktown is the one that I like the most, has many destinations and places. I was recently talking to someone and we were talking about the changes that are happening in Oakland, and the one question that she raised with me, which is the question that I would share with you, because it applies not just to Oakland but to the cities that you're in, and that question was, Oakland for who? And I think that that's at the heart of what we will talk about over these next couple of days. The places that we're in and for whom are those places. But let me tell you a couple of things about Oakland that you may not know. Oakland actually is a city of about 413,000 residents. It's the most ethnically diverse city in the US. Oakland has more artists per capita than any city in the country. And Oakland actually is home to the 3rd largest concentration of lesbian residents in the US. Oakland was also recently designated by an organization as the 5th most liberal city in the US, following Detroit, Gary, Berkeley, and DC. But then there's some things you'll hear about Oakland over the next few days, and the panel will actually expound on a number of these. Oakland has become one of the most expensive cities in which to live, currently rated #1 for the fastest rising cost of living versus income of any city in the country. The Bay Area, including Oakland, leads the country with the largest income inequality gap in the US. And as tech companies have found their way to Oakland and the East Bay, our city has seen a steady and disturbing stream of migrating Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans, individuals and families who are leaving Oakland and moving into the surrounding suburbs and communities in Alameda and Contra Costa County. So what should we make of these changes? And I think that there are 3 things that we'll talk about in this conference that relate to people, places, and power. I think that we in philanthropy have to be focused on all 3 of those, but especially on the issue of power. Because I think that is the key to success and to changes that we want is in power. And I think there are 3 words that I would attribute to power that I think we in philanthropy have to hold true. One of them is organizing. The second one is policy. And the third is advocacy. That is what we need to be focused on and thinking about and doing. At the same time that we're delivering services for the residents of these communities that we serve, Oakland in particular, I think that we also have to make sure that the people in these communities have voice, have power, have influence to balance out the public and the private sector in terms of what we're trying to do. So how do we do that? Let me give you just a few thoughts from someone who has worked directly in the Bay Area and in Oakland in particular. I think that there's a real need to make sure that we use these demographic changes and shifts to come together to influence the power makers and to become the power makers. I speak specifically of the fact that Oakland has already, and the Bay Area and California, achieved what this country is moving towards, which is minorities becoming the majority. In California, we've been here for a number of years now, with the Latino community becoming the largest population here. And I think that what we have to understand as African Americans, as Asians, as Native Americans, is that we have to join together with the Latino community to ensure that the power that we exercise is power that benefits all of us. Secondly, technology and economic power. We have to harness technology for the benefit of all. If we look around as we all have, the smartphone is becoming actually the computer for individuals and families. We have to use that technology to improve the ability to organize, to really influence, and to go further than we've been able to go up to now. I think the challenge for us is that the solutions should not be us alone, but should be a combination of us, the private sector, and the public sector. But what's most important is that we have to ensure that the residents that we serve, the voices that we're trying to lift up, are the voices that really are speaking to the issues, and the issues are the issues that they most feel are prominent in their lives and can change them and make things better for all of us. So that is our challenge. So with that, I'd like to again welcome you to Oakland and hope you enjoy this city as we all enjoy it. At this time, I'd like to introduce and bring up Dr. Tony Iton, who's the Senior Vice President of Healthy Communities for the California Endowment. Tony's been a longtime friend of mine and of this community, and he will introduce the panel and get us started. Tony?
Good afternoon. I'm Oprah today. So sit here and chat. And then we're going to invite up some fascinating panelists who are going to give us some really interesting insights into Oakland and its ecosystem, particularly around this issue of power, and give us some insight into the history of where that power emanates from in Oakland. And we're going to engage the panel in a way, we hope, that they can actually talk to each other and query each other. And then we're going to offer an opportunity for you all to engage with the panel as well. I've been in Oakland since 1990, and I feel like I've been here forever. I mean, I had 3 kids here, so once you have kids, you assume that where your kids are is where your home is. So Oakland is my home. I'm from the California Endowment, and some of my colleagues are here today. One of the things that's unusual about the California Endowment is that we're a health foundation that really defines health as broadly as you could ever have imagined, which creates, for some of my colleagues, quite a few headaches when we're trying to figure out what we can fund and what we can't. But there's a reason for that. When we started off at the California Endowment, one of the first things that many new health foundations do, we're 20 years old now, one of the first things that health foundations attend to is the issue of access to health care. Because in this country, we really equate health and health care. And the most urgent manifestation of the health crisis is people not having health insurance or not being able to get the care that they need. And we refer to that as kind of health philanthropy 1.0, which is where you just look for the problems that you can address immediately that provide clear evidence of solutions. But as you spend some time doing health access, you recognize that health is actually a relatively small contributor to the well-being of people in a community. And you move to 2.0, and 2.0 is typically looking at special populations. It may be LGBTQ, it may be boys and men of color, it may be the disabled population, it may be immigrants, or it may be special health care concerns like disparities or certain types of diseases. And you work on that for a while, and then you realize, you know, there's something bigger here. And then you gravitate to what we call health philanthropy 3.0. And that's where the California Endowment, we think, is right now. We recognize that place, the environment, the neighborhoods in which people live contribute in multiple ways to their ultimate health. We like to say that when it comes to your health, your zip code matters more than your genetic code. And in fact, we can actually predict how long people will live based on their address. And we shouldn't be able to do that. And we have much more interesting data today, these days, looking at not only health is predictable by your address, but your educational attainment, your income, your employment. In fact, there's some very good data now that can predict so-called social and economic mobility based on where people live. And what we recognized is that the American dream, when you look at it and try to quantify it, is kind of dead. In fact, some of the researchers that look at this data, they say that if you want the American dream, you're better off moving to Canada. Now, some of the interesting aspects of this data is that there are regional variations in terms of economic and social mobility, and the San Francisco Bay Area actually happens to have fairly high social and economic mobility compared to other parts of the country. And trying to understand why that is, I think, is really important. But before I bring the panel up, let me just briefly talk about this notion of place. When we started to look at our work here in California, we decided we wanted to go deep into 14 places for a decade and spend about $1 billion trying to improve the root causes of health inequities in these places. And when we looked at place, we recognized that place is not just the built environment. It's not just whether there are parks and bike lanes and treescape and grocery stores and minimizing liquor stores and fast food. We recognize that that's important, but we also saw a big role for the institutions in those places, the schools, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, social services. How do those systems engage populations that are vulnerable? But we recognize that that wasn't even sufficient. We also had to look at the services that are provided and available to people. What's housing like? What's healthcare like? But even that's insufficient. At the end of the day, we at the California Endowment and others in this room recognize that what's really important is the social, political, and economic power of people living in these communities. How do we build social, political, and economic power and a critical mass of people living in a place so that they can hold the institutions that ostensibly serve them accountable for equity? So health is really about so much more than health care. It has so much to do with how people feel their environment interacts with them, how much control they have over the things that happen to them. So we've actually invested quite heavily in building power. So I want to invite this panel up to talk about Oakland and Oakland's unique movement moment and some of the ingredients that create that moment in Oakland. Starting with Erica. And as Erica comes up to the stage, I want Erica to talk about a little bit about her history in Oakland. She's got a unique history to tell us about, and a little bit about what brought you here to this moment today.
And how much time do I have?
That beautiful young lady there is going to flash signs at you. 4 minutes you have.
I was joking. Who am I? Well, first and foremost, I am a human being. And I think that that's something that we, not you and I, but all of us forget about one another. I thought about that on Sunday a lot. Mm-hmm. And I have coinciding identities. I am in a woman body. I am of African descent. I don't fit on the spectrum of sexuality neatly, and I don't want to. I have a daily practice of meditation, which came to me when I was incarcerated. I was a member of the Black Panther Party for 14 years. And consider Oakland my home. I raised 3 children here. I agree with you about where your children are as your home. I also work with children and teens and young adults very intentionally because I want to remain youthful. Why did I come to Oakland? Because I was called from within to become a part of a movement that was bigger than me and bigger than the generation I was in. It was a movement which transformed the whole United States, and it wasn't just the Black Panther Party. It was a movement of indigenous people, the only non-immigrants to this land, by the way. And I wanted to work with Asian American, Central and Latin American people. I wanted to work with the women's movement, the gay liberation movement, as it was called at that time. Everything was moving. I said to someone last week, Oakland's always in a movement moment. Always. And I love that about it.
And that's what brought you here originally?
Yes, I wanted to come from the East Coast. I grew up in Washington, D.C., which used to be Chocolate City, not anymore. And I went to a historical Black college and university and was propelled to come and be a part of freeing Huey Newton. But bigger than that, transforming that which kept people very unfree internally and externally, and to work with dismantling structures that further all kinds of carceral sites.
Okay, so you were pulled to Oakland.
Yes, I was.
You felt Oakland's siren song.
Well, yes, I did. I heard her, and I love her. And about the moment we're in, it belongs to each of us. And I believe that we can each be accountable and responsible to the moment, no matter what hats we're wearing, what resources we can give or receive. Does that answer your wonderful question?
That does, and we're going to hear more from you in a minute.
Okay.
But for now, we'd like to call our next panelist, Michael McBride. Come on up, Mike. Michael,
Yes, sir.
you're not in an airplane.
Nope. I don't think I am, at least unless I'm dreaming.
You got 2 feet on the ground.
Yeah.
Help us understand, Michael, you've done so much in Oakland and now nationally. Help us understand a little bit about this moment from the perspective of some of the simultaneous movements that seem to be percolating around the country, particularly with an eye to Black Lives Matter and some other of the interesting social movements that we see kind of converging around the country. You've been kind of in the middle of a lot of this.
Yeah, so I'll say that it's the best of times and the worst of times. I'll say it's the best of times because for at least my generation, I'm 40, this is the first time I've experienced a bold, public, unapologetic demand for liberation and the humanity of dark bodies and poor bodies. And it's not going away. It's a hell of a time to be alive, right? Especially since my dark skin ain't going away. Neither is the dark skin of my daughters. So it's the best of times. It's the worst of times because it's obvious to me that not that many people care. And most people's rhetoric does not match their actions as relates to their level of care or investment in the dignity, the self-determination, and the value of dark bodies, poor bodies, bodies that are not fitting within a very narrow expression of whiteness or human, what it means to be human. So because of that, I think it's the worst of times also, because many of us who are fighting for liberation are deeply traumatized. We're filled with hope, but we're traumatized. A lot of us are overworked. A lot of us are working with low wages. A lot of us are suffering from the slow death march of the clapback of the empire to our resistance efforts. So it's the best of times and the worst of times.
And how do you see Oakland fitting into all of that?
Well, Oakland is the greatest expression of this contradiction. Oakland is a place, and maybe I'll expand it to the Bay Area. It's a place, and I'm from San Francisco, Hunters Point. I'm in Oakland because when I came back from school, I couldn't afford to live in San Francisco. And thankfully, I was able to buy a house at the foreclosure time, or I wouldn't be able to live in Oakland. So Oakland is the greatest expression to me of a people, a region, dare I say, a set of progressive folks who are intoxicated with the language of what it means to be progressive, but totally devoid of the actions that one would say is progressive. You know, people talk to me about Donald Trump, want me to fear the boogeyman I don't know, but what about the boogie people I do know?
Yeah.
Libby Schaaf, Ed Lee, political, quote unquote, progressive political agents, representatives that we the people supposedly have elected that are solely responsible for the policies that continue to see our people murdered in the streets with no accountability. Our law enforcement apparatus continually strengthened and not held accountable for their injustice, the displacement of the poor. That's not because of Donald Trump. So for me, like, Oakland is, the Bay Area is a very important cautionary tale, I think, that we just don't continue to keep talking about issues that many of us, our lives are literally being erased from a narrative and, dare I say, from existence. Sorry to be so heavy.
No, hey, that's why you're here. Maria, come on up. Welcome. So we heard a little bit about gentrification from Michael, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it from you. But talk to us a little bit about how, from the perspective of somebody who's based here in Oakland, why do you think so many social movements either get started here or take root here and manifest themselves in a uniquely Oakland way? Occupy, Black Lives Matter. So much of the anti-gentrification displacement movement has really kind of taken form here in Oakland and finds a unique voice. And part of that voice is your voice.
I try. I think. No.
Try again.
Can you hear me now? No. Ahora sí? Ahora sí? All right. Causa Justa is in this interesting moment where we have this position that we earned through decades of often invisible and misunderstood work at the grassroots, fighting gentrification and displacement, one person, one eviction at a time, and also building a movement, one person, one end of eviction at a time. And sometimes we have struggled at the grassroots with the scale of the problem being so much bigger than the scale of our movements. And this has been true for a lot of people, in a lot of places, at a lot of different points of the history of humanity. But it didn't stop us from swinging, right? You just keep swinging, and then you land some punches, and you might land them in a place where it could have a strategic impact. And for us, when we look at gentrification and displacement, what we're looking at is first a history of divestment, and then the remaking of our communities, of working class communities of color, in particular African American and Black communities and Latino communities here, but also across the country, the remake of these communities in the interest of the development of capital, and at the expense of human development. And I think this value around human development and everything it would take for all of us to reach our potential collectively and individually is something that's in the water here in our city, in part because the development of progressive institutions, including left projects, has a history here in the Bay Area too, and that's in our DNA. Just like the queer community has its DNA here in the Bay Area. I'm one of the many people who came to the Bay Area escaping homophobia in my family that was because of the fundamentalism in Christianity. And what I found here was a way to make political meaning of suffering. And aren't we all trying to do that at the end of the day? Because otherwise there's just capitulation. And I think from the grassroots is growing in impact. You know, we've formed this regional electoral alliance called Bay Area Rising to try to reach the regional scale of the problem with the grassroots ethics and the power building that comes from Black communities, Latino communities, communities of color, working class communities. And that's an experiment. I think that's what Oakland has, is this lack of fear of failure. Just try it. Just go out there and stay out there until something changes. And that's very brave, you know? I'm thinking about my, okay, I'll save it. It's very brave. It's a good idea. It's often not in the DNA of philanthropy, but it is in the DNA of movements. And as we begin to articulate ourselves, I think this is a moment of articulation. We're taking a big leap, and we're becoming who we are collectively, and that's human development.
All right, let's bring Mia up. Welcome, Mia.
Hey.
So you're on a crowded stage, in a crowded room.
Beautiful stage. With
beautiful crowded stage, beautiful room.
I mean the people.
Beautiful people. In a beautiful city with a lot of beautiful and engaged social justice organizations. And yours is one that is particular high profile, has done some really engaging work, but you also work with others. How do you navigate this complicated landscape of organizations working on parallel issues? How do you collaborate with them? What's been your experience in Oakland?
Well, I think this is like connected to some of the things that people have been saying about Oakland and what Oakland is at its heart. You know, it's a contradiction. It is both an embarrassment of riches, and at the same time, it is about displacement. It's about a lack of safety, a lack of humanity, and those clashing together has created this sanctuary of incredible movement-driven institutions, which is amazing. It's an amazing place to be, and I also came to Oakland a couple decades ago, kind of looking for a sanctuary, and I really feel like that's part of what Oakland means to people, and it's a sanctuary for our movements too, a sanctuary for this heart of innovation and of taking risks and of doing things differently. And I think of the people that APEN works with, our communities who Oakland is a sanctuary for as well, who, like so many other people, came to Oakland because they were displaced from other places. Displaced because of war, displaced because of poverty, and they came to Oakland and they met each other. And that's one of the amazing things about what being in a place where the movement for social justice, for racial justice, for equality is actually part of the DNA of the city itself. And that also has created a crowded field, which can in of itself be a complicated environment to work in, because sometimes when we think we are feeding the institutions that are going to do the work, we're feeding a veneer or a shell. And sometimes we can get in the way of our own best work and our own best intentions. And so I think Oakland is such an important place to experiment and innovate and show how we can really follow our hearts to create the best solutions for some of the most intractable problems that it's all here in Oakland. And I feel like I have to mention just how raw people are feeling, how raw I'm feeling today in Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've thrown this word movement around a little bit up here, and you're four seasoned power makers, brokers, shakers, movers. What do you mean by movement? Erica and Michael, give us a sense of, what are we talking about? If Oakland is in perpetual motion, how do things actually end up gelling? Are we always going to be in movement? Are there these nodal points in time when there are movements? What is it about Oakland at this moment that speaks to movement? What is it about Oakland historically that speaks to movement? Are we just using that word liberally because we have no better word?
Well, I, sitting next to one of the heroes of, I guess, any movement coming out of Oakland, I'm humbled to try to answer that question first, but I think movements hopefully create space for a radical imagination. It is an expression of the world we want to see and the kind of aspiration and investment people are willing to make in a particular moment in time to propel us forward towards that radical imagination. I don't believe that because we are indeed human and we are not omnipotent, meaning we don't have an endless amount of power, energy, and resources, it seems hard to me to imagine that a movement can just be unending without end in the way in which we are seeing an expression of it. So I would imagine that when the movement moments happen, or the movement seasons happen, that all of us who claim to be about that life, wherever you are, will actually figure out a way to support those who have the courage, the opportunity because of the season of life they're in, to actually make the movement go as far down the field as possible. I told a lot of elected officials here in the Bay Area who I thought were very progressive that I'm not asking you to shut down a bridge or a freeway, but what's the most radical thing you could do as a policymaker? What's the most radical thing you could do as a philanthropist to actually make sure that the people who are doing that work can keep their lights on, not be subjected to terroristic policing, put a policy apparatus in place so the gains we make do not have to be fought again and again 10 years from now. And that to me is what I think all of us have a role in a movement. When the energy of the people creates that moment of possibility, can we all plug in ways that actually follow the people's lead and not the lead of many of our status quo positions?
Erica. back a little bit too with the Panthers and sort of, if you can, compare and contrast a little bit from back then to today. What kind of things do you see are different in Oakland that may be conducive to movement or maybe not?
Well, thank you, by the way. Thank you. Well, first, movement is not, the meaning of it, for me, symbolizes fluidity and continuity. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't end. It is ongoing, and it starts here. This is something I learned when I was incarcerated, that freedom is an inside job. However, having said that, simultaneously, I would work for the freedom of others, not just myself. And we tend to think in choppy ways about history. So from the feminine perspective, a child is born and the mother's work hasn't stopped. It continues through the stages and places in life. And you have a baby, right? So it won't stop when your child is 18 or 48. It continues. And I'm not joking. So how would movement stop? Because the birth of a human being and the trajectory of a human life is fluid. What we want are external movements that mirror the internal ones. That means, though, that each of us, whether activists or philanthropists, recognize that those are just roles we're playing at that time, but that we have a responsibility to humanity. Mm. And that calls for self-inquiry. Mm. Where do I hold embedded assumptions? What do I really think went on in Orlando? How do I feel? What if I was that mother or father or that loved one, that child of? Rather than that is there and Oakland is here. Mm. I remember when I recognized that Hunters Point, baby, was not on the map of San Francisco at one point. Mm. How did that happen? Nobody I knew would have done that. So we have structures in place, and part of the movement is to change infrastructure and to change decision-making tables so they represent the people supposedly the decisions are being made for.
Let's talk about that a little bit. When you were running around with the Panthers, I mean, we were talking about Governor Reagan and Earl Warren and, a pretty reactionary set of people that were in positions of power. And now we ostensibly have these progressive leaders throughout Alameda County, throughout San Francisco and Oakland. So we've made changes in sort of who rules. What hasn't changed?
Changes in the structures. Mm-hmm. We have not. We place wonderful people into old, crumbling infrastructure and expect them to wave a magic wand. It's impossible. We could put Reverend Mike into the mayor's seat.
Be careful.
Do that.
And then there would be somebody who would complain about what he did or didn't do. Because the structure of that seat has not changed. And I'm being honest. I'm not even being, what is that word, political? I'm thinking about how things work. And they work that way. And so from the grassroots, there needs to be a push, which includes some understanding of reality about the way things are, but a push to change things. Not to change, to transform. And I didn't run around with the Panthers. Actually, every day I'm grateful to be alive because I lost so many friends and my husband to the structures that were so corrupt and heinous that they thought the way to change things is to just kill it. That's why Orlando was so profound for me. We don't like it, kill it. So it will take a lot for all of us together to change the structures, but I'm hopeful that we can. For the people like the fourth graders that I spoke to 2 weeks ago, who say they want to be a part of a movement that makes it so that love is the underpinning of our interactions.
Let me encourage our panel members here to just jump in. But let's stay on this theme of structures. The structures have not changed. How do you see that in your work? How does it manifest itself? And what are you doing to try to change that? Jump right in.
Well, I think what I was going to, submit is that one of my big frustrations is that we know that there is a systemic and structural challenge.
Yes.
And I think we've always known that. I think when people sign up to be political actors in a terrible, unjust system and structure, as they come from the people, I believe they are then accountable to make sure that they do not become a professional agent of the system and structure. Like, they have to always remain accountable to the people, or they then will be subjected to, I think, a very fair critique about their inability to bear witness and to help transform and change that structure and system. One of our comrades here, Brother Turha, talks a lot about how our movement in relation to the system and structure is often put in three kind of buckets. He says it's a reactive, it's reformist, or it's revolutionary, meaning that there are many different ways that we must respond to the system. There is not just one way.
That's right.
I think the challenge is there are preferences by the system and all of us, including faith leaders and others, who are more close and more willing to identify to the system as it is, to put our big bets on a reformist approach versus one that is reactive, meaning one that is deeply confrontational, agitational to the evils of the systems as they manifest, and one that is revolutionary, one that is trying to transform the system into something that the children, because their imagination has not yet been smashed with a hammer, right, is saying we want to be in a place of love. And so I do think part of my task and our task is how do we challenge and create clear pathways whereby people who have decisions to make how they will place their big bets, whether it's political, whether it's economic, whether it's their time, whether it's their body, whether it's their ballot, whether it's their bucks. How do we make clear pathways as an organizer where you can make a big bet, not just in the thing that is safe and pragmatic, but in the thing that may actually create the kind of change in world we want? And again, that will take reflection and a lot of personal inquiry. But I do think right now, we don't really have that kind of diversity of investment happening. We have people always betting on the powerful, the status quo, And that is one challenge I would leave to the room, not being lost upon me where we are, right? How do you place a big bet on something that you may not be able to overdetermine or even know how the end is going to be? How do you place a big bet, dare I say, have some faith that the people can actually take your $10 and give you $1 million return in justice, in life, in hope, and in possibility?
And there's a kind of, in that same vein of the regular old investments, there's a kind of ideological bankruptcy in it, frankly. And this is not a problem just of philanthropy or just of the movement or just in one community. This is a problem of our radical imagination in the United States in 2016, the way things are, right? There's a novel by Barbara Kingsolver, Animal Dreams, that I really like. She's talking to her lover and she says, "Do you ever dream of flying?" And he says, "I work in a pecan factory. I dream of pecans." So for us to learn how to govern, we have to overcome this ideological bankruptcy. And the way that it plays out in our work in housing rights and in gentrification and displacement, and Oakland is ground zero for a national crisis of the rise of the renter nation, and renters are the majority of the people in the United States and have the least rights in that place, in their home, is that people invest in trickle-down economics. People see housing and gentrification as a problem of supply and demand because that is the easiest way to see it, because we work in a pecan factory and we see pecans. But building market rate units has never built affordable housing. It has never housed working class people, and it never will. That's trickle-down economics. It's ideologically bankrupt. What we would have to do if we're gonna imagine the people having power and impacted people governing in their interests and in the interests of humanity as a whole is something like regulating the housing market in the interests of human development. And can we do that? Yeah. Of course we can. It's difficult. Let nobody tell you it's easy, okay? But it needs to be done. And we're in the situation now where every one of the 9 counties in the greater Bay Area is pushing for renter protections and renters' rights. Raise your hand if your foundation has a renters' rights area. Hey, all right. You've ruined my talk. Just kidding.
There's only 3 of them.
This is a challenge. This is a gap. And this kind of gap is because the movement is articulating itself in a new way. And when I think of a movement as a football team, soccer, you know, I'm Argentine. So people play different roles at different times. Sometimes the ball's in the midfield, right? And you have to arrange yourself around that. Sometimes you're about to shoot and nobody even knows where the goalie's at. We're in that place of reorganizing the team. And we may not immediately score a big goal, but we're shooting on goal. And we need a little backup.
Yeah, I think that I'm well mic'd, I think. One of the things about Oakland that you, as most of the people in this room are not from Oakland, there is this dirty little secret about the progressive bubble that we're in. And you talked about, you know, progressive leadership is, in fact, I think one of the things that is holding us back from actual transformational leadership, real freedom and liberation, because we have to not just deal with the issues that our communities are dealing with, like displacement and poverty and pollution and the deep isolation. But when we are organizing ourselves into taking political power, we're having to wrest political power from a progressive, institutionalized, progressive political leadership that is not doing its job. They're not doing the job that we put them into office to do, and that's part of the problem. We can no longer accept, we need an escalation. And this is what I think in Oakland there is this cycle, this history of escalation, of tactics, of understanding our own power, of building upon that and building new institutions. And right now, if we're in a moment of anything in Oakland, we're in a moment where an escalation of boldness is absolutely a requirement to be a citizen of Oakland.
Oh.
Because we can't, a lot of people have been talking about the Black Lives Matter movement as being an escalation in tactics. And I think that's a complete miscalculation of what the escalation actually is. Black Lives Matter movement is an escalation in the audacity of people to love themselves and to require that we all do that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's both this thing about Oakland that I love so much, is that this is the place where I've learned that lesson. And that's incredible. But I think that from the outside, you have to understand that one of the things that I was saying before about why I'm feeling so raw in this moment is so much of what makes Oakland an incredible, vibrant, diverse, powerful, rooted in social justice. Part of the reason that it's such a wonderful place is part of what makes it so attractive, and the pain I'm feeling about that being part of what is displacing the very people who make Oakland what it is, make Oakland what is at its heart. The fact that our LGBTQ family, their places like Pulse are being turned into hipster bars. These places of sanctuary that have created some of the most powerful social justice movement lessons and moments in history is being actually literally displaced. And we need an escalation in our commitment to a boldness to not just stop this, but to create something better.
Thank you. So we invite the audience to come up to the mic to throw some curveballs at this power panel here. And while people are coming up, I'd like the panel to just toss out some really radical ideas for this audience. A group of funders, conservative, bureaucratic, boring funders. Shake them up a little bit. What should funders be thinking about today that's radical, that leverages this moment?
Governance. What relationship do you need to the grassroots that would facilitate governance of the most impacted, the people who have the most to gain from social change? If they were to be in the driver's seat of the car that you bought, how would that work?
I would say the most radical thing I would say to philanthropists is, how do you decenter white people? Yeah. Dr. Cornel West said something one time that he said, one of the greatest barriers we have to overcome is white anxiety, white fear, white incompetence, and white inability to grasp complex racial hierarchy and reality. I think it's telling that Bernie Sanders could not capture the largest block of the Democratic voting population, black women, en masse. But yet, many of us would say that his message was pretty, at least, as progressive as many of us may want, his populism and all these other kind of ideas, talking about he's a socialist and all that stuff. I think for many of us that is very appealing. And you know, I can give you a lot of anecdotal conversations about why I think that is the case, but I think it is important for white folk to not always feel like if it doesn't make sense to you, that it's not something that is worth exploring all the way to its conclusion. Because there are blind spots that we all have. I just think white privilege and racial hierarchy affords most white folk to stay in their position of power and influence without having to check their blind spot. I'll give you one quick example. I was in Washington, D.C. 3 days before Newtown happened. I was in the White House advocating for mass incarceration and gun violence 3 days before Newtown happened. And just to fast forward all the way through, I was involved in a lot of those subsequent efforts to try to get the background check bill passed. I was in those rooms advocating for issues related to black and brown people, particularly state violence and interpersonal violence and police violence. Many of the DC political folk, white progressives, could not get it. They said, McBride, if you just ride with us, I mean, they didn't say ride, but this is how if you just go with us and bring your preachers and your clergy and give the moral arguments for why we need background checks, we will win. I said, cool, I'll go with you. I'm not gonna stop talking about what I care about, but I'm gonna go with you. And when they failed to get a 90% nation-approved background check bill through Congress, do you think any of them lost their jobs? Do you think any of the political consultants who shouted me and my folk down in the room to stop talking about race lost the contract? Do you think any program officer or policy person at the Center for American Progress didn't just keep going on to the next fight? To me, I don't get many bites at the apple to fail at big problems. And I think that philanthropy could do well when she talks about governance. How do you get the most directly impacted people you know to be your driver, shotgun, whatever, on the road to liberation, and listen to them when they tell you things that you cannot fully process with your life experience, your ways of formation and thinking. That is probably the most radical thing I would say. And hopefully I still get a grant for more than 2 people in there.
Do we have questions? Where are the questions, funders?
It's okay. I know, we're a little scary, but it's okay. You can ask us a question, it's okay.
Come on, step up. Go ahead. You've all digested now.
She was gonna.
Okay.
Did somebody have their hand up? Or standing up?
There's one over there.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm over here like tearing up. So, sorry. This is such a tough time. It's such a challenging time for people who come from an intersectional perspective and background. It's such a challenging time to understand how to be revolutionary and an ally, to know when to step up and to step back. I think in particular, as it relates to this election, I've been thinking a lot about social movements. And I think, as funders, what we keep hearing about these movements is they're not strategic. They don't have demands, which we all know to be false. So I think the question I have is, how do we tell the stories in the places where power exists? Because in our hearts and in our communities and in our families and even on Facebook, we seem to know them. And then we get in rooms with people who have millions of dollars to hand out, and they keep repeating assumptions. So how do we step out in some level of risk as funders to tell the stories, to bring the voices into the room, and to exhibit the type of courage that I see everyday people exhibiting right now in this moment?
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I mean, I like that you named the courage of everyday people, because that is certainly what I think about. Because we're talking all about funders, and that's fun for us. But also, everybody has a role to play, and figuring out what's my position, what can I do from my position, that's the question, right? Is where do I have power, and how can I use it in the interest of collective human development, or insert your own vision, right? We have a member who is living in her car after she was evicted, and she's leading the work for the expansion of renter protections in Oakland on behalf of the majority of the city, which is renters. So the way I think about it is, I just have to show up and try to meet her. If she shows up, I have to show up. And so part of the trick is just to keep showing up, and then you figure out what to do. In the Latin American liberation theology tradition, you would say, well, to act is the first step, and then you reflect, and then you have a praxis back and forth. And so there's a way that we learn to play our positions by playing them. And that's important, especially when we have access to power. The other thing I would offer is, we've been talking a lot about the queer community, and Code Switch is one of our great contributions to the world. So you talk one way in one place and one way in a different place. You're saying the same thing, but you're switching the code, right? So there's code switch that happens between movements and philanthropy, between organizing and advocacy, between electoral work and grassroots work, learning how to switch the code without losing the vision. All of us are playing that interpreter role, and it's very important to play that. And part of interpreting is you have to understand what's being said, and Pastor Mike was talking about what can get in the way of understanding what's being said. And then there's another aspect of it is we could be frozen by our insecurity or our fear or our lack of control over the outcomes to not take action. And so to take that action, to try to interpret what we're hearing, what we're beginning to understand, and try to play our role and make mistakes while we're doing it and come back, I mean, that's going to make us better humans, and it may also win our liberation.
So, okay.
We're out of time.
No.
If you've got something...
Okay, I'll be really quick.
Yes,
okay.
go ahead.
I would say that let's break down this barrier between us and you, and think of ourselves as you're actually playing a role, like Maria said. We are playing a role. We need funders to be organized amongst themselves, not just us. We need this part. You are part of this intersectional moment and movement, right? And as we are garnering all of our different resources and all of the lessons that we have learned, and we come together in this moment of intersectionality, we're being drawn to each other. And funders, half the people in this room I know, or some of them have been over to my house. Many of you come from the organizations that would put you on this stage at this point. We have to remove the line between us being the actors and you being the providers or something. We have to be in it together. And in a real way, we have to share power. You have to share power, and you have to listen to the people who are on the ground. I mean, this is all very simple. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I feel like, if anything, we have to escalate in terms of what resources we really do have. And if there's a problem with how our world view is being messaged, it's because we're doing it in a million different ways, from a million different, what are those things called?
Podiums.
Podiums. You got to come down and actually meet us at our table and eat with us. And I don't see how we're going to do this. We do need each other.
On that deep note, great note, I want to thank this wonderful panel. And I encourage you to wish we had more time. I think you've learned a little bit, for those of you from those 26 states, not in California. I think you've learned a little bit about why Oakland is so unique, why we think we're very unique, apart from the Golden State Warriors, of course. And we encourage you during this conference to continue to learn as much as you can about Oakland and to share with us some of the successes that you've had in your places. And with that, I don't know who next comes up to the stage. Sandra Witt.
Yeah, let's join me in thanking our panel again. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was an amazing opening for this, for the convening. Really excited, really thought-provoking. Hope you have a better sense of the history of Oakland and an appreciation for Oakland and all its contradictions, which there are many, and we'll be talking about many of those contradictions for the next couple of days.